He was just a boy, 17, barely stepping into adulthood, when life decided to test him in ways that would break most grown men. His days should have been filled with laughter, school, and dreams of the future, but instead, they were filled with silence, disappointment, and the heavy burden of pain. He had scars, both visible and hidden, reminders of battles he never chose to fight. Each day felt like a mountain pressing down on his chest, each night like a storm that wouldn't end. There were moments when he looked into the mirror and barely recognized himself. His eyes no longer carried the spark of youth. Instead, they carried the weight of survival. People around him whispered, judged, and doubted, assuming he would never rise above the broken pieces of his life. And sometimes, in his darkest hours, he almost believed them. But deep inside, buried beneath layers of hurt, there lived a small voice, fragile, trembling, yet unyielding. A voice that whispered, "You are not finished. You are not defeated. You are not broken forever." At first, he tried to silence it, because hope felt dangerous. Hope meant risk, and risk meant more pain. Yet, that voice refused to die. And slowly, like a seed sprouting through cracked concrete, it began to grow. He started to wonder if maybe his scars weren't proof of weakness but proof of survival. Maybe every painful night was shaping him into someone who could withstand storms that others would run from. He didn't have it all figured out. He didn't know where his journey would lead. But he made one silent promise to himself: I refuse to stay broken. I refuse to let my scars define me. I will rise, no matter how long it takes. That promise was the spark that ignited his fight. And from that day forward, the boy who had once been shattered began to rebuild himself, piece by piece, scar by scar, into something unbreakable. The hardest battles he fought were never the ones anyone could see. They were the battles inside his own mind, the endless arguments with himself, the sleepless nights where thoughts circled like vultures, the mornings when simply getting out of bed felt like lifting mountains. He would sit at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, asking questions no one could answer. Why me? Why does it hurt so much? Will it ever get better? There were moments when the pain felt unbearable, when giving up seemed easier than trying again. Yet, in those moments, something stronger than despair always pulled him back. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet resilience, the kind that whispers, just one more day. Hold on, just one more day. The world expected him to smile, to act normal, to pretend everything was fine. And so, he learned to wear masks. At school, he walked through crowded hallways with headphones on, his scars hidden under long sleeves, his pain disguised with silence. No one knew the weight he carried. No one saw the tears that stained his pillow at night. But that invisibility became his training ground. While others lived carefree, he was learning endurance. While others complained about small problems, he was learning the strength to survive big ones. Every lonely lunch, every ignored call, every time he felt invisible, those moments built a foundation inside him that even he didn't yet recognize. Slowly, he began to understand that strength isn't built in comfort. It's built in suffering. It's built when your soul is tested, when your heart is shattered, when you stand face to face with darkness and decide not to let it consume you. And though he still carried doubts, though his scars still ached, though his nights were still heavy, he carried one truth with him: if I can survive this pain, I can survive anything. And that truth became his weapon, invisible yet powerful, forged in silence, ready to be unleashed when the time came to rise. One day, as he sat alone staring at the walls of his small room, he realized something powerful. Nothing in his life would change unless he changed. No miracle was coming, no one was going to save him, no hand was reaching down from the sky to pull him out of the pit he was in. The world didn't owe him rescue, it was up to him to rise. That realization was terrifying, because it meant the responsibility was his alone. But at the same time, it was freeing, because if no one else controlled his future, then it meant he did. And with that thought, he made a choice. He would no longer wait for the perfect moment, he would create it. He would no longer hope for strength to magically appear, he would build it. The first step wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost invisible to the world. He woke up earlier than usual, laced his worn-out sneakers, and went for a run before sunrise. At first, his lungs burned, his legs screamed, and every part of his body begged him to stop. But he pushed through, whispering to himself, "One more step. Just one more." That run wasn't about fitness, it was about proving to himself that he could start. When he came back, sweat dripping down his face, something inside him felt different. He wasn't fixed, but he was moving. And movement was better than standing still in the shadows. From that day, he kept stacking small victories. One push-up turned into 5. 5 pages of a book turned into entire chapters. A few lines in his notebook became entire pages of reflections, dreams, and promises. Each small act, each tiny step, became a brick in the foundation of the new life he was building. And though no one else saw it, though the world still doubted him, he knew deep inside, he was changing. He was no longer the boy who sat in darkness waiting for rescue. He was the boy who had decided to rise, no matter how slow, no matter how painful, no matter how many times he stumbled. Because for him, progress was not about speed, it was about refusing to stay broken. Change did not come overnight. It wasn't like flipping a switch where darkness turned instantly into light. It was a slow, grinding process that tested him every single day. Some mornings he woke up with fire in his chest, ready to take on the world. Other mornings, he woke up exhausted, unmotivated, tempted to go back to the comfort of who he used to be. But this time was different. This time, he refused to let his feelings control him. He reminded himself that feelings are fleeting, but choices are permanent. And so, even when he didn't feel like it, he showed up. He ran. He lifted. He read. He wrote. He worked. Each action was a brick, and each brick built the walls of the new version of himself he was creating. The boy who once hid his scars began to see them differently. As his body grew stronger, as his shoulders squared, as his eyes regained their fire, he started to realize his scars weren't ugly, they were proof. Proof that he had survived nights others would have broken under. Proof that he could endure pain and still rise. Proof that life could knock him down, but never keep him there. And with every push-up, every drop of sweat, every sore muscle, he felt less like a victim and more like a warrior. Slowly, people began to notice. His classmates saw the difference in the way he walked, no longer hunched or hiding, but upright and steady. His friends heard the difference in his voice, no longer uncertain, but filled with quiet determination. Some doubted him still, saying it wouldn't last, that he'd fall back into the old broken boy he used to be. But he didn't let their voices matter. Because he had discovered the truth, the greatest strength doesn't come from proving others wrong, it comes from proving yourself right. And with every passing week, he was proving it. To himself. To his scars. To his past. The boy who once lived in silence was slowly becoming someone unstoppable. And though he knew storms would still come, he no longer feared them. Because he was no longer made of fragile pieces, he was being rebuilt brick by brick into something unbreakable. Just when he thought he was finally gaining control, life reminded him that growth is never a straight line. One afternoon, he faced a crushing setback. An opportunity he had been working toward slipped through his fingers. The rejection letter landed like a weight in his chest, reopening old wounds of not being good enough. For a moment, it felt like the world was laughing at his efforts, whispering that no matter how hard he tried, he would always remain the broken boy he once was. The pain returned, sharper than before, but this time he was different. Instead of collapsing under it, he allowed himself to feel it fully, every ounce of disappointment, every sting of rejection, every trace of anger. But he refused to let it paralyze him. Instead, he asked himself, what lesson is hidden in this? That question became his shield. Instead of running from pain, he faced it, studied it, and learned from it. He realized that rejection wasn't a sign to quit, it was a sign to refine. So he went back to work, harder and smarter. He doubled his effort, adjusted his strategy, and poured his energy into growth. Where before he would have taken failure as proof of weakness, now he saw it as training. Each setback was a new teacher. Each failure was a stepping stone. Life was striking him, yes, but instead of breaking, he was bending, adapting, and growing stronger. And slowly, he began to understand, the true test of strength isn't in how you perform when things go well, it's in how you rise when the ground falls out from beneath you. And every time life tried to bury him, he reminded himself, I am not here to stay down. I am here to rise. The boy who once saw only failure began to notice something different. Though the world still threw obstacles at him, though rejection and setbacks still stung, he realized that each time he got back up, he was rising a little faster, a little stronger. It wasn't dramatic, no applause, no spotlight, but he started to collect what he called his small victories. Waking up earlier than the alarm. Finishing a run even when his legs begged him to quit. Reading an extra chapter instead of scrolling endlessly on his phone. Speaking up in class when his voice trembled with fear. These moments seemed ordinary, invisible to everyone else, but to him, they were monumental. For the first time, he felt control not over the world, but over himself. And that control was priceless. The boy who once blamed life for his pain now realized he had power in his choices. He couldn't stop storms from coming, but he could decide how he faced them. He couldn't erase his scars, but he could choose to wear them as proof of survival instead of symbols of defeat. Every time he chose discipline over comfort, courage over fear, persistence over surrender, he was rewriting his story. And slowly, the outside world began to reflect his inner change. His grades improved. His body grew stronger. His mind became sharper. Even the way he carried himself transformed. People who used to overlook him started to notice him, not because he was louder, but because he radiated something rare, resilience. He was no longer defined by the boy who had been broken. He was becoming the young man who refused to stay down. He understood now that greatness doesn't come in giant leaps, it comes in consistent steps, repeated every day, even when no one is watching. And as he stacked those small victories, he felt something awakening inside him, something that had been buried under pain for years, belief. Belief that he wasn't destined to remain in the shadows. Belief that his scars could be transformed into strength. Belief that his future could be greater than his past. It happened slowly, and then all at once. After months of grinding in silence, of pushing himself when no one was watching, of stacking small victories day after day, the boy began to see results he couldn't ignore. His body was leaner, his steps quicker, his eyes brighter. Tasks that once left him drained now felt almost effortless. The boy who once dreaded mornings now embraced them as opportunities to sharpen his edge. But the most powerful change wasn't in how he looked, it was in how he thought. Opportunities that once slipped through his fingers began to return, and this time, he was ready. He raised his hand in class and answered with confidence. He volunteered for challenges that once terrified him. He faced rejection without collapsing. And then came the moment that proved how far he had come. A competition was announced at school, a test of endurance, discipline, and courage. Months earlier, he would have laughed at the idea of even trying. But now, something in him whispered, "Why not? You've trained for this. You are no longer who you were." The training was brutal. Early mornings, sore muscles, aching lungs. There were days he wanted to quit, but every time the thought crossed his mind, he remembered the broken boy he used to be, the one who let pain define him. And with every drop of sweat, with every rep, with every breath, he told himself, "That boy is gone. I am not broken. I am becoming unstoppable." When the day of the competition arrived, he stood on the starting line with a calm he had never felt before. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination. He wasn't competing to prove anything to the crowd, he was competing to prove something to himself. The whistle blew, and he ran. Every step was heavy, but every step was fueled by years of pain turned into fuel, scars turned into strength. And when he crossed the finish line, not first, not perfect, but stronger than he had ever been, he realized that the victory wasn't in beating others. The victory was in beating the old version of himself. That day, he understood a truth that would guide him forever. The greatest breakthrough doesn't come when the world finally believes in you, it comes when you finally believe in yourself. The boy who once hid in silence began to notice something unexpected. Others were watching him. His classmates, who used to overlook him, now whispered about his persistence. Teachers who once pitied him began to nod with respect. Even strangers noticed his energy, the way he carried himself with quiet strength, as though the storms he had faced no longer had the power to shake him. At first, he couldn't believe it. He thought, me? The boy who was broken? The one who almost gave up? How could I inspire anyone? But slowly, he realized that people weren't drawn to perfection, they were drawn to resilience. One day, a younger student approached him shyly, saying, "I see how hard you work. I want to be like that too." The words hit him harder than any victory. For the first time, he understood that his journey wasn't just about him anymore. His scars, once a source of shame, had become a source of hope for others. People who were struggling began to see in him a living reminder that pain doesn't have to end in defeat. They began to believe that if he could rise, so could they. This realization transformed the way he lived. He no longer trained only for himself, he trained knowing that his actions could light a path for others. When he pushed through another lap, another page, another late-night study session, he wasn't just building his own strength, he was proving to others that it could be done. He became a symbol, not of perfection, but of persistence. Not of never falling, but of always rising. And something inside him shifted again. For years, he had asked, "Why me? Why did I have to suffer?" Now, for the first time, he began to see the answer. Perhaps his pain had a purpose. Perhaps his brokenness was the soil in which his strength grew, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. And as he looked at the scars on his body and the fire in his eyes, he finally embraced them. Because those scars weren't just his story, they were the reason others believed they could write their own. The boy who once lived in silence now found himself in a position he never imagined others were looking to him for guidance. He wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest, but what set him apart was undeniable: he never gave up. And that persistence was magnetic. Younger boys who were struggling began asking him for advice. Friends who once mocked him now sought his encouragement. Even adults noticed his transformation, often saying, "There's something different about you. You carry yourself like a fighter." At first, he resisted the idea of being a leader. He still saw himself as the boy with scars, the boy who had fallen more times than he could count. But then he realized that this was exactly why he was meant to lead. True leadership doesn't come from being flawless, it comes from showing others how to rise despite flaws. He didn't have to be perfect, he just had to be real. And in being real, he gave others permission to be real too. So, he began to step up. He encouraged classmates who struggled with the same doubts he once faced. He reminded them that failure wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of growth. He organized small study groups, shared workout routines, and more importantly, shared his story. At first, it was difficult to speak about his scars, but every time he did, he saw the hope it planted in others. He discovered that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength in its purest form. And with each act of leadership, he felt himself transforming again. No longer just a survivor, no longer just an example, but a builder, someone shaping others, someone lifting others, someone making sure no one else felt as broken and alone as he once did. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about standing in front, it was about standing beside. And with that truth, the boy who once refused to stay broken was now helping others refuse to stay broken too. The journey that began in silence, in darkness, and in pain had brought him to a place he never thought he'd stand. He was no longer the boy who hid behind his scars, he was the young man who wore them with pride. Every mark, every wound, every memory of struggle had transformed into a testament of resilience. And now, when he looked at his reflection, he didn't see brokenness anymore, he saw strength carved by fire, endurance shaped by trials, and courage forged in the moments he nearly gave up. The greatest revelation came not in victory, not in applause, but in understanding his scars had meaning beyond himself. They became his message. When he spoke to others who were drowning in despair, he didn't preach with empty words, he shared with authenticity. He could look them in the eyes and say, "I know how it feels. I've been there. And if I could rise, so can you." That truth carried more weight than any lecture, because it was lived, not imagined. His scars had become bridges that connected his story to theirs, transforming his pain into purpose. And so, he made a vow: he would never waste his suffering. He would use every scar as fuel to help others heal. He would use every lesson from his darkest nights to guide others toward their dawn. He would be the proof that even the most broken chapters can be rewritten into stories of triumph. The boy who once asked "Why me?" had found his answer. It was never about punishment, it was about preparation. His scars had not been chains, they were keys, unlocking doors of strength he never knew existed. And as he stood, stronger than he had ever been, he realized that his story was no longer just about survival. It was about legacy. He had become living proof of one unshakable truth: you are not defined by the pain that tried to break you, you are defined by the strength you build from it. And with that truth blazing in his heart, he stepped forward, no longer just the boy who refused to stay broken, but the man who turned his scars into strength, and in doing so, lit the path for countless others to follow.